Welcome to Sarah Wood's Tale, where stories comes alive. Please do well to hit that subscription button and turn on your notification bell for subsequent stories. William Hargrave sat in his lavish study, his hands resting on the armrests of an oversized leather chair. The mansion around him, as grand as it was, felt empty, like the walls themselves were closing in. The sunlight streaming through the large windows did little to lift the oppressive air that clung to the space. He could hear the faint sound of the wind rustling the trees outside, but it felt like another lifetime. His thoughts were elsewhere, his mind constantly drifting to his health. A doctor had just left his home a few hours ago, delivering a message he had been avoiding for months. "There's nothing more we can do, Mr. Hargrave. The cancer has spread too far. You have little time left." It was a bitter pill to swallow, but not an unfamiliar one. William had spent his entire life building an empire, amassing wealth and power. Yet now, as the disease ravaged his body, he realized that all his riches meant nothing in the face of death. He felt himself crumbling under the weight of his own regrets, but he didn't know how to share them. For years, he had lived in this mansion, isolated from the world. His business empire was his only companion, and the people in his life, those who served him, were nothing more than distant figures. They came and went, their faces blending into one another, each person playing a role, some as employees, others as acquaintances, but no one had ever become close to him. He had always pushed people away, convinced that his wealth and power would protect him. But now, in the quiet of his final days, he realized how empty his life had truly been. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of the door opening. Clara Thompson, his maid, stepped into the room. Clara was a woman of about 30, with soft features that were often hidden behind the practicality of her work uniform. She had been working for him for nearly 5 years, keeping the mansion in pristine condition. Though William had never thought much of her, he noticed her diligence. She moved about quietly, like a shadow, never intrusive, never demanding. Her presence was familiar, yet he'd never really seen her beyond the role she played. "Mr. Hargrave," she said, her voice low but polite. "Is there anything I can do for you?" William glanced at her, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than usual. She was always there, in the background, taking care of things he didn't want to notice. But today, in his weakened state, he found himself unable to look away. There was something about her calmness that made him feel human. He forced himself to sit up straighter, trying to maintain his composure. "I just wanted to talk to you, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, come in. Sit." Clara hesitated but did as she was told, pulling a chair near his desk. She folded her hands on her lap, waiting for him to speak. William leaned forward, his hands clasped together, trying to steady his breathing. "Clara, you've worked for me for a long time. I'm sure you've noticed that I'm not well. The doctors have told me there's not much time left." Clara nodded, her face betraying no emotion. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Hargrave. Is there anything I can do to help?" His eyes darkened slightly, and he looked down at his hands. "There's nothing anyone can do to help now, but that's not why I asked you here." He took a deep breath, trying to collect himself. He'd thought about this moment for days, and yet, now that it was here, he felt strangely exposed. I need something from you, Clara. Something that I can't get from anyone else." Clara's brow furrowed, and she leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean, Mr. Hargrave?" William swallowed hard. I'm dying, Clara. I have so little time left, and I can't help but feel that my life has been empty. I've had everything, money, power, respect, but I've never had true human connection. I've never known what it means to truly be close to someone." Clara said nothing, her expression unreadable. She was unsure where this conversation was going, but she was listening intently. "I want to experience something real before I die," William continued, his voice growing softer, almost desperate. "Something that's not about business or power. Something personal. Something that could give me peace before I go." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. The words hung in the air between them, and Clara's pulse quickened. "I'm asking you for intimacy, Clara. I know this is a ridiculous request, but I'll pay you $50 million. All of it, if you'll spend one night with me. Just one. I don't expect love, or even affection. I need to feel something real before I die." Clara's face went pale, and she stood up abruptly, backing away from the chair. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she found herself unable to speak. Her mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. "Mr. Hargrave, I don't," she stammered, struggling to find the right words. "I know it's a lot to ask," William said quickly, his voice strained. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. But I need this, Clara. Please." Clara was silent for a moment, staring at him. She wanted to say something, anything, to reject the offer, to leave the room and never look back. But she found herself rooted to the spot, her mind clouded with confusion and disgust. She had been loyal to him, yes, but this felt like a violation. The money he offered seemed to mock the very idea of human connection, and yet she couldn't ignore the desperate pleading in his eyes. She thought of her own life, the struggles, the bills, the constant worry over the future. $50 million would change everything. It would set her up for life, free from worry, free from the endless grind of working-class life. But at what cost? I can't, she finally managed, her voice shaking. "This is wrong, Mr. Hargrave. I can't do this. I'm sorry." William's face fell, and for a moment, he seemed to deflate. The desperation in his eyes was replaced by something else, something close to sorrow, or maybe regret. He nodded, as if he had been expecting her response, but the pain was still visible. "I understand," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have asked. Please, just forget it." Clara hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should leave or stay. She couldn't stop looking at him, at this man who had so much, yet felt so empty. A strange mixture of anger and pity washed over her. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice softer now. "I really am." She turned to leave the room, her steps quick and light as she made her way down the hallway, away from the study. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them making sense. She couldn't understand how she felt, confused, disturbed, and yet strangely moved. As the door closed behind her, William Hargrave sat back in his chair, the weight of his request settling heavily on him. He knew that what he had just asked of Clara was impossible, but he had hoped, for a fleeting moment, that she might understand. But now, he was alone again. Just like always. The next few days were a blur for Clara. She went about her work, cleaning the mansion, preparing meals, and doing the countless tasks that had become routine for her. But her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment in the study, the words William had said, the look in his eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. She tried to focus on her duties, but it was hard to ignore the lingering sense of discomfort. What kind of man would make such a request? What kind of life would lead to such desperation? It felt wrong, and yet, there was a part of her that understood his loneliness. Clara had never been close to anyone in her own life, but she had always known the aching pain of isolation. Still, she couldn't reconcile his offer with her sense of morality. That evening, as Clara finished preparing dinner in the kitchen, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting one of the other staff members, but instead, it was William. His face was pale, his posture more hunched than usual. His illness was visibly taking a toll on him, and Clara felt a flash of sympathy for him. "Clara," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Can we talk?" She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Hargrave." He motioned for her to follow him, and together they walked through the grand hall and into his study once again. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. This time, she was prepared for whatever he had to say, though she had no idea what that might be. Once they were inside, William turned to her, his expression more solemn than it had been before. "I've been thinking a lot about what I asked you," he began, "and I realize now how wrong it was. I was desperate, and I made a terrible mistake. I don't expect you to change your mind, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for putting you in that position." Clara looked at him, unsure how to respond. There was something different about him now, something more human, more vulnerable. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her voice steady, "but I still can't do what you asked." William nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I understand. I needed to hear you say it." Clara hesitated, then spoke again, her voice softer now. "If you need someone to talk to, Mr. Hargrave, I'm here. I may not be able to give you what you want, but I can listen, if that helps." For a moment, there was silence between them, and then William looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. That That helps more than you know. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of connection with the man who had once seemed like nothing more than a distant, unapproachable figure. Clara Thompson sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands shaking slightly as she held a piece of paper in her hands. It was an official letter from her bank, reminding her once again of the mounting debt she owed. The past few months had been especially hard. Her mother's medical bills had piled up, and with her father's recent passing, she was left to manage everything on her own. Clara worked tirelessly as a maid in William Hargrave's mansion, but despite all her hard work, the money never seemed to stretch far enough. There was never enough to cover all the expenses, let alone save for a future she could call her own. As she stared at the letter, Clara's mind kept returning to the conversation she'd had with William a few days ago. She had tried to push it out of her mind, tried to convince herself that she had made the right decision in refusing his offer, but it lingered, gnawing at her thoughts like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. $50 million. The sum William had promised in exchange for one night. It was unimaginable, money that could solve all her problems and more. She could pay off the debts, secure her mother's care for the rest of her life, and live without fear of losing everything. It was the kind of money that could change the course of her life. And yet, the very thought of it twisted something inside her. What would it cost her to accept? She let out a deep sigh, folding the letter back up and setting it on her bedside table. She couldn't think about this now. She needed to focus, to clear her head. The door to her small apartment creaked open, and Alice, her best friend, stepped inside. Alice was a woman in her early 30s, with bright, fiery red hair and a laugh that could fill a room. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Clara and Alice had become inseparable over the years. Alice had a way of making Clara feel like anything was possible, even when the world around them seemed to conspire against them. Clara offered a weak smile as Alice plopped down beside her, her eyes scanning the room. She could tell right away something was off. Clara wasn't her usual self. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that Alice could feel without Clara even saying a word. "What's going on, Clara?" Alice asked, her voice soft but knowing. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." Clara hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "It's this offer. From Mr. Hargrave," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she said his name. He asked me to sleep with him. For $50 million. Alice blinked in surprise, her mouth falling open. "What? He asked you? Clara, are you serious?" Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I refused, of course. I couldn't do something like that. But, the money. Alice, it's so much money. It could change everything for me. For my mom. I could pay off all our debts, make sure she gets the best care. I could finally get ahead. I've never had a chance at a life like that." Alice's eyes softened with sympathy. She reached out, taking Clara's hand in hers. "Clara, I know things have been hard. I know you're struggling. But you can't let this offer cloud your judgment. $50 million won't fix what's broken inside you. If you do this, it won't just be your debts that you're paying off. You'll be paying a price that you can't ever get back." Clara's lips trembled as she tried to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "But what if it's the only chance I get? What if I could have everything I've ever wanted? A house of my own, my mom's health taken care of. The things I've always dreamed of. And for what? One night of my life." Alice shook her head, her voice firm. "No, Clara. Don't let desperation make you do something you'll regret for the rest of your life. There's more to you than just the things you can buy. You're not just your circumstances. You have so much more to offer the world than that." Clara felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. She knew Alice was right. She knew that what William was asking wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper, something that could never be bought or sold. But the temptation was so strong, and the pressure of her situation made it hard to see any other way out. "I don't know what to do, Alice," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so tired. I'm so tired of fighting. Every day feels like a struggle, and every step forward feels like it's just 2 steps back." Alice squeezed her hand, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "Clara, I love you like a sister. And I'm telling you, don't make a decision that'll change who you are, just because things feel impossible right now. You are worth so much more than this." Clara's heart ached as she listened to her friend. She knew Alice was right, but the temptation was still there, pulling at her, whispering that it could all be solved so easily. If only she could let go of her pride, let go of her sense of morality for just one night. "I'll think about it," Clara said softly, though deep down, she knew Alice's words had already started to settle in her heart. The days following her conversation with Alice were a blur. Clara went through the motions of her daily life, taking care of the mansion, preparing meals, cleaning rooms, and making sure everything was in its place. She didn't have the luxury of time to think about her personal life. William's condition was worsening, and she found herself watching him more closely than ever before. It had been a week since the offer, and although Clara had tried to push the thoughts of it to the back of her mind, they had a way of creeping back in, especially when she was near William. She couldn't deny that he had become weaker. His once commanding presence was slowly fading, and he spent more and more time in his study or in his bedroom, resting, fighting the pain that racked his body. Clara saw the changes firsthand. The way he struggled to get out of bed, the way his voice trembled as he spoke. There was a certain sadness in his eyes now that hadn't been there before, and Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. One evening, after dinner, Clara was tasked with bringing some of his medication up to his room. She knocked softly on his door, hearing his weak voice call out to her, "Come in, Clara." She opened the door to find him sitting by the window, his hands resting on his lap. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing. The man who had once seemed like a titan now looked frail and fragile, like a man already halfway to the grave. "Your medication, Mr. Hargrave," Clara said quietly, stepping into the room. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice raspy. He reached out for the pills, but his hand shook, and for a moment, Clara caught a glimpse of the man behind the wealth, the man who had lived a life of solitude, consumed by his own ambition. There was something in his eyes, something that spoke of regret, something that reminded her of her own fears. "Are you okay?" she asked before she could stop herself. William didn't respond right away. He looked out the window, his gaze distant. "I'm not sure, Clara. I don't think I've ever really been okay. But I don't know what else to do now. I've built an empire, but I have nothing to show for it. No family, no real friends. Just this." He gestured around him at the large room, the opulent surroundings that meant nothing now. "It's hard to find peace when you've spent your whole life chasing something you didn't really need." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "You've spent your life building something, but now you're left with nothing." William nodded slowly. "Something like that." Clara placed the pills on his nightstand, her fingers brushing the surface. "You've been good to me, Mr. Hargrave. I may not understand everything, but I've never felt like you were just another employer. I care about you." William turned to her then, his eyes softening. "I never wanted you to feel like just another servant, Clara. You've been the one constant in this house. The one person who's treated me like I was a human being. And I'm sorry for what I asked of you. It wasn't fair." Clara swallowed hard, the emotions she had kept bottled up for so long suddenly coming to the surface. "I don't know what to think anymore. I know you're not well, and I know you're struggling. But I still don't understand why you would ask me for something like that. It doesn't make sense to me." William looked down, his hands trembling. "Maybe it's because I don't know how else to find peace. Maybe it's because I'm afraid of dying alone. Afraid that all this will mean nothing when I'm gone." Clara stood there, her heart heavy. She had refused him once, but now she saw the depth of his pain, the loneliness that seemed to consume him. Was it just about the money? Or was there something else, something deeper, that he was seeking? As she turned to leave, she glanced back at him. "I don't know what the right thing is anymore," she said quietly, before closing the door behind her. In the silence of the hallway, Clara felt torn. She had always believed that right and wrong were clear-cut, but now, she wasn't so sure. Her heart ached for him, but she knew she couldn't give in to the temptation. Or could she? As the days passed, she found herself thinking about the offer again, wondering if there was more to it than what she had first understood. Maybe it wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about redemption. And maybe, just maybe, William wasn't the only one who needed to find peace. Clara hesitated as she stood outside William Hargrave's bedroom door. The mansion, so familiar to her now, felt unnervingly silent, the usual hum of activity muted by the tension she carried with her. It had been days since their last conversation, and since then, her mind had been spinning in a whirlwind of confusion, doubt, and an inexplicable urge to see him again. William's offer was still there, hovering over her like a dark cloud. But it wasn't the money that was compelling her now, it was something else. Something deeper. Clara had spent days fighting with herself, weighing the consequences of her decision, and ultimately, She had arrived at a single conclusion. She wasn't going to do it for the money. Not anymore. She had refused him before, but now she felt something else, a pull of empathy she couldn't ignore. William was dying, and despite the wealth and power he wielded, he was as alone as anyone she had ever seen. Clara had worked for him long enough to know that his life had been built on walls of money, power, and isolation. She had never been able to look past those walls, until now. But what was she walking into? Before she could lose her nerve, she raised her hand and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," William's voice called from the other side. Clara pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. He was sitting in the chair by the window again, staring out at the sprawling grounds below. He seemed so fragile now, his body frail and hunched, his skin pallid and his once sharp eyes now dull with the weight of his illness. Clara cleared her throat, unsure of how to begin. "Mr. Hargrave," she said quietly, almost whispering. I wanted to come by." William turned his head toward her, offering a small, weary smile. His eyes flickered with something. Relief? Regret? "Clara, I didn't think you would come." Clara shook her head slightly, her voice softer now. "I didn't come because of the money. I came because you're not alone, Mr. Hargrave." His face softened, and he looked at her with something approaching gratitude. "You're the first person to say that in a long time," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. The silence between them stretched for a moment before Clara spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you asked me, and I still can't understand it. Why would you make such a request? Why not just let go of all this?" William leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he gazed at the far-off horizon. "It's complicated, Clara," he began, his voice raspy and weak. "For so long, I thought I was building something important. I thought my wealth and my success meant something. But now, as I approach the end, I see that it's all meaningless. I never learned how to connect with people. I thought I could buy everything, but I can't buy peace. I can't buy the kind of love I've always needed." Clara stood quietly, her heart aching at the rawness of his words. She had never seen him like this, vulnerable, exposed, broken. It was as if the walls he had built around himself were crumbling, and in their place, there was a man who was as lost as she was. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I understand more than you think. I've spent my whole life working just to survive. My mom's illness, the debts, the bills, sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it. I've never had the luxury of choosing anything, really. I've just done what I had to do to keep going." William turned his gaze back to her, his eyes focused now, as if seeing her for the first time. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I didn't know you were carrying all of that." Clara shook her head slightly. "No one does. We all have our struggles, but it doesn't make it any easier." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken understanding, a shared sense of grief, loneliness, and the longing for something more than what life had given them. Clara wanted to walk away. She wanted to close the door behind her and escape the emotions swirling in her chest. But something held her in place. "You know, Clara," William said after a long silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "I always thought people like you, people who work in places like this, were just there. You never seemed to matter. But now, I realize how wrong I was. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. You're holding the weight of the world and still standing." Clara didn't know how to respond. The words touched her more deeply than she expected. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not even Alice. It made her feel something she couldn't quite name, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She hadn't expected to find empathy in this place, least of all from the man who had once seemed so far removed from her world. "I'm not strong," she said softly. "I'm just doing what I have to." William's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Clara feel as though he were seeing her for the first time. "I never thought I'd be in this position," William murmured, his gaze falling to his hands, his voice tinged with regret. "But I can't escape it. I can't undo the damage I've done, the lives I've affected. All I can do now is try to find some kind of peace before I go." Clara hesitated. She had come here with a decision already made, but hearing him speak like this, hearing the depth of his regret and the loneliness that weighed on him, she wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know if I can help you," Clara said slowly, her voice quiet but firm. "But I can listen. I can be here for you, if that helps." William looked up at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that for me?" Clara nodded, a small, tentative smile crossing her face. I can't promise you anything else, but I'll stay. For now. For the first time since they'd begun speaking, William's face softened into something that could almost be called relief. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a breath, as if a weight had been lifted off him. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Thank you, Clara. Truly. Clara didn't know what to say either. She didn't have any answers, but she was beginning to understand the pain he had been carrying. Perhaps, she thought, he wasn't just asking for one night of intimacy. Maybe, in the end, he was simply asking to be seen, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had spent his life running from the truth. And now, in his final days, he was finally ready to face it. In the days that followed, Clara and William's relationship began to shift. They started to talk more often, long conversations that stretched into the night, conversations that went beyond the boundaries of employer and servant. Clara found herself sharing more about her life, about the struggle she had endured for so long. She found herself laughing more than she had in years, and though the laughter was bittersweet, it was still real. But as much as their conversations helped bridge the gap between them, Clara felt something else, an undercurrent of tension that ran beneath the surface. William's illness was getting worse. He was weaker, frailer, and more dependent on her, and though she felt sympathy for him, she also felt trapped by the complexities of their situation. Clara's emotions were beginning to become tangled in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had always seen William as the untouchable billionaire, someone who was above her, someone who didn't need her. But now, as he leaned on her more and more, as he sought comfort in her company, Clara began to see him not as an employer but as a man who was afraid, who was reaching out for something, anything, that could give him peace before he died. The financial offer was still on the table, but now, it no longer felt like a mere transaction. It felt complicated. Clara felt her resentment growing, not towards him, but towards the system that had made them both so vulnerable. She resented the idea that she might have to give up so much of herself just to ease his pain. She resented that he, with all his wealth and power, had become so dependent on her, and yet, she had nothing else to offer him. I don't know what you want from me anymore, Mr. Hargrave, Clara said one evening, after a long, uncomfortable silence between them. They were sitting in the study, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. I can't fix everything. I can't make all your mistakes disappear. William's face grew serious, his eyes darkening. I don't expect you to fix anything, Clara. I only want someone to listen. Someone who can look past all the money and the power and see me as I am. I want to be human again before I die. Clara's heart clenched as she listened to him. It was hard to reconcile this man with the one she had once thought of as a distant, untouchable billionaire. But the truth was, they were both struggling. She was fighting for her future, and he was fighting for his past. In the end, they were both prisoners of their own choices. I don't know if I can do that for you, Clara said softly. I don't know if I can be what you need. William stared at her, his eyes searching hers. What do you need, Clara? What do you need from me? Clara hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. I need to feel like I matter, like I'm not just the maid. For the first time in their conversations, William's eyes softened with something that could almost be called empathy. You matter, Clara, more than you'll ever know. But despite his words, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had become more about what they both needed than what was right. She was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, this entire situation was about more than just her survival, or his. Maybe it was about the tension in the air between Clara and William had been building for days. She had tried to stay distant, tried to focus on her work and push the memories of their last conversation to the back of her mind. But she couldn't. William's words, his pain, his vulnerability, those things had settled deep inside her. And so, one evening, when she couldn't keep the emotions bottled up any longer, Clara finally spoke up. She stood in the doorway of his study, watching him as he gazed out the window. His posture was slouched, his expression distant. He had grown weaker in the past few days, and it was clear the disease was taking its toll. Mr. Hargrave, Clara said, her voice firm but calm. We need to talk. William turned slowly, as if surprised to see her standing there. Clara, he whispered, his voice ragged. What is it? Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She had spent so much time thinking about this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to begin. I need to understand, she said quietly. Why are you doing this? Why ask me of all people? What do you really want from me? William sighed and sank back into his chair, looking up at her with a mix of weariness and something else, something that could almost be called regret. I know it sounds absurd, he began, his voice soft, almost apologetic. I've spent my life accumulating wealth, power, and influence, but in the end, they've only made me more alone. The people around me only care about what I can give them. I've never had anyone who just saw me for who I am. All my life, I've been hiding behind the persona of a successful businessman, a powerful man, but now, as I'm nearing the end, I realize how much I've lost. Clara listened carefully, her gaze steady. But why me? Why not someone else? William closed his eyes for a moment, his fingers pressing against his temples. Because you're different, he said softly, as though the words were being dragged from him. You've always been kind. You've never looked at me like I'm a walking paycheck or a source of power. You've always treated me with respect, but never with awe. I've seen that in you, and I don't know how to explain it, but I thought that maybe, just maybe, you could help me. Clara felt a pang in her chest. She had always known that William was lonely, but hearing it so plainly was a different experience altogether. She had never imagined him as a man burdened by isolation, yet here he was, a man crushed by the weight of his own success. Helping you is difficult, Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. You want me to share something with you, something personal. But why? Why does it have to be this way? What about your family, your friends? William looked away, and for a long moment, Clara didn't think he would answer. But then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have family. My wealth drove them all away. And the friends I thought I had, they were never friends. They were just people who wanted something from me. I was never a person to them. I was always just a means to an end. Clara took a step forward, her hand reaching out to rest on the arm of his chair. You're a person, William. I see that now. And I'm sorry for everything you've gone through. William's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of something raw in his gaze. I've spent my whole life running from my mistakes. I thought that if I kept moving, if I kept succeeding, I could outrun the emptiness inside me. But now it's too late to fix anything. I know that. I know I can't erase the past. But maybe, just maybe, if I could share a moment with someone who doesn't see me as a billionaire, someone who sees me as a man, maybe it would give me some peace before I go. Clara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't just a request for sex anymore. It was a desperate plea for connection, for validation. And she felt herself softening, despite her initial shock and discomfort. Do you really think that one night will give you peace? She asked, her voice gentle. William nodded slowly, a look of quiet desperation in his eyes. I don't know, but I'm willing to try. If you can't help me, Clara, I understand. But I thought, just for once, I might be able to be human, to experience something real. Clara stared at him for a long moment, considering everything he had said. Her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. The money, the power imbalance, her own feelings of being used, it all seemed so wrong. But then, she remembered the pain in his eyes, the deep loneliness that had become his constant companion. She knew, deep down, that this wasn't about power. It was about human connection, about a man reaching out for something before it was too late. I'll do it, Clara said quietly, her voice steady. I'll spend one night with you. Not because of the money, but because you're asking me for something that no one else can give you. William looked at her, disbelief and gratitude washing over his face. You would do that for me. Clara nodded. But understand this, William. This isn't a transaction. It's not something I'm doing for you to ease your guilt or fulfill a fantasy. It's because I see the person you are underneath all of this. And maybe we both need this. But there are no strings attached. No expectations. William's eyes welled with emotion, and for a moment, Clara thought he might say something more. But instead, he simply nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for seeing me. The night arrived, shrouded in an air of heavy anticipation. Clara had never felt more conflicted in her life. She had agreed to spend this night with William, but even now, as she stood outside his bedroom door, she was unsure of what she was about to face. She had changed into the soft, simple dress he had asked her to wear, and when she entered the room, she was met with a quiet warmth that she hadn't expected. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of candles flickering on a small table by the window. William was sitting in a chair by the fire, his face etched with exhaustion, but there was a softness in his expression that made her pause. He stood when he saw her, his eyes searching hers, as if waiting for something, some sign, some confirmation that this was what they both needed. "I'm not sure what to do now," Clara said softly, her voice hesitant. "We can talk, if you want. If that's what you need." William nodded, his voice low and full of emotion. I just need someone to be here with me. Someone who won't judge me." Clara walked slowly toward him, sitting down across from him by the fire. The conversation flowed easily between them at first. Small talk, stories about their pasts, little bits of laughter, and moments of unexpected understanding. The vulnerability between them deepened, as both of them revealed the parts of themselves they had long kept hidden. Clara found herself laughing at his jokes, even as the heavy weight of their situation pressed down on her. She could see the humanity in him now, the broken, lonely man who had only ever been surrounded by people who wanted something from him. And for the first time, Clara felt like she was seeing the real William Hargrave, the man, not the billionaire. As the night wore on, their conversations grew more intimate, and there was a quiet shift in the atmosphere. The emotional tension between them was palpable, a mixture of deep connection and hesitant desire. William reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed against Clara's. She didn't pull away. For a long time, they simply sat there, both of them lost in the moment, as if the world outside didn't exist. Clara's heart ached for him, not for the man who had everything, but for the man who had nothing but regrets. "Are you sure about this?" William asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara met his gaze, her eyes soft but steady. "I'm here because I want to be. I want to help you, William. I want to be here for you." And then, for the first time, the walls between them completely dissolved. What followed wasn't just a physical act. It was a moment of profound emotional connection. Both of them had come into the night with their own expectations, their own fears and hesitations. But by the time the night had ended, they had both changed in ways they couldn't have anticipated. William wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was a man who had opened himself up, who had shared his pain and his humanity. And Clara wasn't just a servant. She was a woman who had offered him something much more valuable than anything money could buy. In the end, it wasn't about the intimacy they shared. It was about what they both found in each other, the understanding, the compassion, and the connection that transcended everything else. The morning after was a strange silence. Clara had awoken to the faint light filtering through the heavy curtains, her mind still grappling with the events of the previous night. She felt disoriented, not just from the emotional intensity of what had happened, but from the realization that the walls between her and William had fallen, and what remained was an undeniable connection. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of the house waking up. In the distance, she could hear the gentle hum of the mansion's staff going about their morning duties. But inside the room, it was just her and William, his breathing slow and steady as he lay beside her, his face soft in sleep. Clara's gaze drifted over to him, and she felt a pang of guilt. She had agreed to be there for him out of compassion, out of a sense of duty. But what had happened between them last night had been far more complex than that. It had been vulnerable, raw, and intimate, not just physically, but emotionally. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. Her body ached, not just from the night they had shared, but from the heaviness of what it had meant. She had done what she thought was right, but now she wasn't sure. The money, the security for her family, it all seemed so insignificant now, compared to what had transpired. William shifted slightly beside her, groaning softly as he woke. His eyes opened slowly, meeting hers, and for a moment, there was no need for words. His expression was a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He was the first to break the silence. "Clara," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the emotions of the night. I don't know how to thank you for what you did. What we did." Clara didn't know what to say. She had agreed to be there for him, to offer him something he had wanted. But now, with the morning light, everything felt different. The complexities of their connection felt heavier, more real. "You don't have to thank me," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I did it because you needed someone. But now I don't know what this means." William sat up, his face tired but sincere. He reached out to touch her arm gently, as if afraid to impose, but unable to resist. "I never expected this to be so complicated. It's just that I've spent my life alone. And last night, for the first time in a long time, I felt human again. But now I feel even more lost. Clara's eyes welled with tears, though she quickly wiped them away. She had tried so hard to keep her emotions at bay, but they were overwhelming. She understood his loneliness, perhaps even more than she realized. William, she said softly, I don't know what you expected from this, but it's not just something I can forget. We've shared something that can't be undone. I'm not just a maid anymore, and you're not just a billionaire. You're a man, and I'm a woman, and what happened between us, it's not just a transaction. It's real. William looked away, guilt washing over his features. I didn't mean for this to change things between us. I thought it would be a way for me to feel less alone. But now I'm afraid I've made things worse. Clara stood, her legs weak as she moved toward the window. She looked out over the sprawling gardens, her mind racing. The money he had promised was hers now. It was already in the bank account, waiting to secure her family's future. But the weight of it, the cost of that money, felt so much heavier now that she understood what it had truly meant to William. Clara, William's voice broke through her thoughts. I don't expect you to stay. I know things can't go back to how they were. I wanted to thank you for being here when I needed someone. Clara turned to face him, her chest tight. She could feel the tears welling up again, but she swallowed them back, her voice steady. I think it's time for me to leave, William, she said, her tone soft but resolute. You've gotten what you wanted, and I've gotten what I need. But I can't stay here. Not like this. We're not the same anymore. William nodded, his face contorting with a mixture of pain and understanding. I know I've crossed a line. I don't know how to undo what I've done. Clara walked toward the door, her hand resting briefly on the doorknob before she turned back to face him one last time. I'm sorry, William, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I need to go. William didn't speak again, but his eyes followed her as she walked out of the room, the door clicking softly behind her. The silence that followed felt like the closing of a chapter, one that had changed both of them in ways they hadn't fully understood yet. Clara went about her departure quietly, gathering her things with a heavy heart. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The mansion felt empty now, even with its grandeur, its wealth. Everything felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost, but at the same time, something important had been gained. She was walking away with $50 million, but she wasn't sure if the price had been worth it. William's death came quietly. In his final days, his illness had ravaged his body beyond recognition, but his mind remained sharp until the very end. Clara had stayed by his side, visiting him regularly, but the emotional distance between them was now impossible to ignore. They had shared their final moments together. The awkwardness of their last encounter lingered, but there was also a mutual understanding that neither could fully articulate. On his last day, Clara sat by his bedside, her hand resting gently on his, much like it had during the quiet moments of their earlier conversations. His breathing had become shallow, and the once strong man now seemed frail and small. Clara, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you. For everything. You gave me something I never thought I'd have again, peace. Clara squeezed his hand, fighting the tears that were threatening to fall. You gave me something too, William. You reminded me that we're all just human. And sometimes, we need someone to see us for who we really are. William smiled faintly, his eyes closing as he drifted in and out of consciousness. I was afraid, he murmured, almost to himself. Afraid of dying alone, afraid of never being seen. Clara leaned forward, her voice trembling with emotion. You were seen, William. You were. With one final, quiet breath, William passed away. There was no dramatic flair, no final words, just a peaceful release from a life that had been filled with both triumph and regret. Clara remained by his side for a while longer, her heart heavy with the weight of what had passed between them. The funeral was small, attended only by a few close associates and distant relatives. Clara wasn't part of that world, but she stood in the back, her heart quietly grieving for the man who had once been so isolated, so desperate for a connection that he had made a last, terrible bargain. She hadn't come for the ceremony or the people. She had come to pay her respects to the man who had taught her so much. A few days later, the lawyers arrived with the papers that would transfer the $50 million into her name. It was an amount she had never imagined possessing, enough to free her from years of struggle, enough to give her a life she had only dreamed of. But as she looked at the check in her hand, she didn't feel triumph or excitement. Instead, she felt a quiet sadness. She had come for the money, but she had left with so much more. The emotional toll of her time with William was greater than she had anticipated. She had witnessed his humanity in a way few had, and she had carried that burden, that connection with her now. As much as she needed the money, she couldn't help but wonder if there was a deeper cost. Clara walked away from the mansion one last time, her eyes casting a final glance at the imposing building that had once been her world. She had come as a maid, and now she was leaving with everything she could have ever dreamed of. But she was also leaving with a part of herself she hadn't expected, a deeper understanding of love, loss, and what it meant to be human. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Clara was no longer the same woman who had entered William Hargrave's life. She was someone new, someone forged in the fires of compassion, struggle, and an unexpected connection. She walked away from the mansion, the future unclear, but her heart open to whatever came next. And as she took her first steps into the world beyond, she couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? Would she ever truly understand the true cost of the money, of the experience, of the bond she had shared with a dying man? Only time would tell. Please don't forget to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe to get more interesting stories like this.